Good evening and welcome to the Philosophy Department. My name's Fiona and along with Matt, we both teach AQA Philosophy at Suffolk One. So what I'm going to do this evening is just talk you through what philosophy is about, what you're going to study, how we study it, how it's assessed, and also what you might think about doing with an A-level once you've achieved it. So the study of philosophy includes a huge range of different areas, and we can break those down into roughly three. So the first one we can see here is ethics, and this is something that you may have studied at school. So this focuses on studying things like moral questions to do with is it ever right to kill and eat animals, or is euthanasia ever morally justified? But underpinning that, we also might think about how we actually go about making moral decisions at all. So that's an area that we'll be looking at. Metaphysics is an area of philosophy which is concerned with the nature of existence, what exists. So, for example, does God exist? We might consider what the nature of being a human is, what does it mean to be a person? And finally, we've got epistemology here as an area of study, and that's to do with what is knowledge. So epistemology literally means the study of knowledge. So this is thinking about how do we produce knowledge, how do we justify knowledge, where do the ideas that we have come from? So those are the areas of philosophy that we can study, but underpinning all of that is the method by which we do philosophy, and that's called logic. And that just means making sure that you have an idea, that you can test that idea, and that you can spot problems and overcome problems in a range of different ideas that you might have. So AQA philosophy is broken down into 4 units, and in year 1 we're going to cover these 2 units. So the first unit that we will be studying when we start in September is called epistemology, which, as I said, is the study of knowledge. So we can again break that down into elements. So that's thinking about what we mean by the word knowledge. Can we base our knowledge on what we perceive using our senses, or should reason be the source of knowledge? And finally, what the limits of our knowledge are. So that's epistemology. After Christmas, then we'll be looking at moral philosophy, and that's concerned with how should you make a moral decision. And there are 3 theories here about how we could go about making moral decisions. And what we'll do is we'll look at the theory, understand what the theory claims, what the reasons are for holding that theory, and then looking at are there any objections to that theory, and can we defend it in the face of those objections? And ultimately, are any of those 3 ways of making moral decisions correct? Then we're going to look at how we can apply those methods to applied ethics. So we'll look at specific problems that we might come across in life. For example, is it ever right to eat meat? Or we might think, is it ever right to lie? And we'll look at how those different approaches would feel about those questions, and we'll look at whether they're correct or not in our opinion. And then finally, we're going to look at what the word good actually means. So when I'm claiming that something is good, what does good refer to? Does it refer to the action? Is it an actual thing? What do we mean by the word good? So as we move into year 2, we're going to be looking at metaphysics. So that breaks down into 2 units as well. So the first one is the metaphysics of God. So we'll start by considering what do we mean by the word God. Then we'll be looking at arguments for and against God's existence. So the first 3 here, the ontological, teleological and cosmological, are all arguments for God's existence. And then we'll consider the problem of evil as an argument against God's existence. And we'll be evaluating each of those to decide how strong we think those arguments are. And finally, we'll be looking at religious language, which is really a conversation about what the word God refers to. So that's metaphysics of God. And then after Christmas, we'll be looking at the metaphysics of mind. So we'll be considering what is meant by that word. So we use the word all the time. We use the concept of self all the time, but maybe we haven't really considered what that word refers to. So we'll be starting by considering dualist theories, which suggest that the self is made up of physical and non-physical elements. And then we'll be considering the possibility that there is only the physical. And then how do we understand the word mind in that context? And there are three theories here: behaviorism, identity theory, and eliminative materialism. And then a final theory, functionalism, looks at a completely different way of understanding the word mind in terms of what the word mind does rather than what it actually is. So while we're investigating all these different issues in philosophy, we're also practicing how to actually do philosophy as well. And there's a particular method to do that. And that's what we were talking about earlier by logic underpinning the whole of philosophy. So this is the general method that we use when we approach a question in philosophy. So we'll start by reading an argument on a particular topic, such as, is there a God? We'll have to look at how the argument works. Does it make sense? What do they mean by the things that they said in that argument, and what's their final conclusion? So we have to start by understanding. Then we're going to start thinking about, well, is what they've said correct? Are all the premises or reasons that they've used within their argument true? How have they justified them? And are there any ways that we could challenge those premises? We also might want to know whether those reasons or premises they've used actually support the conclusion that they've come to well enough, and so therefore is their conclusion justified? So once we've looked at reasons why there might be problems in the argument, we then have to think, well, are there any potential ways of overcoming those problems? So philosophers will often suggest ways in which you can get round problems to defend the original argument. Some philosophers also might think about editing the argument in some way in order to strengthen it so that it does overcome the problem that was being faced by the original argument. So once we've gone through that process of challenging and answering problems, we then have to come to an overall conclusion, considering all of the issues, whether that argument ultimately works in the end or not. And that's the process that we use in philosophy. It's also a really good process to apply to any problem that you have to face, or any project that you have to plan, or any essay that you have to write in philosophy, but also in other areas of study and work and life. So at the end of your 2 years of study, you'll sit 2 3-hour examinations. So paper 1 will cover everything you've done in year 1, so that's epistemology and moral philosophy, and paper 2 will cover everything you've done in year 2, which is the metaphysics of God and the metaphysics of mind. And in each paper, they will be made, and each section will be made up of a 3, 2 5 marks, a 12, and then a 25 mark essay. So the smaller mark questions, the 3s, the 5s, and the 12, are all testing your ability to be precise, to be accurate, to be clear, and to be logical. Whereas the 25 mark question, whilst it's looking at those things, its focus is on your skills of evaluation. So can you form an argument using what you've learned to justify a particular conclusion? So students find when they study philosophy A-level, they find it really interesting and engaging to consider lots of different questions from a range of different perspectives. But then we've got to think, but what's the value of doing that? What can you actually do with a philosophy A-level? So the list that you can see here is a very small snapshot of the kinds of sectors that you might think about going into having studied philosophy. So the reason why that list is there is because of the skills that you get when you study philosophy. You get the skills of logic, analysis, evaluation, argument, being persuasive, and these are all really important skills in all of the jobs that you can see in front of you here. There are a range of different jobs that we haven't put on this list. The list is endless, but this just gives you a flavour of the kind of things that philosophy would really well prepare you for. So, for example, if you're thinking about going into law, then philosophy is brilliant at that, because you have to be able to look at problems, to be able to analyse them, to be able to spot issues, to be able to be methodical in your approach to things. And this applies to all the things that are on this list as well.